Hi, and welcome to another edition of Lessons Learned with your host, Rafael Piñero. We're going to be dipping into the storyline of Mass Effect 2, the game that most people consider to be the best game in the Mass Effect trilogy. And one of the reasons why it's considered to be one of the best games in that trilogy is because it has a very interesting set of characters. Among them, one of the first characters that you meet, Jacob Taylor. Or at least, Jacob had the possibility of being a very interesting character until you delve into his background. You see, Mass Effect 2 has a specific mechanic which is not unique to Mass Effect or even BioWare games, but it is found here, and it's in order to earn the loyalty of the different characters in your party, you must complete several loyalty missions. You do the mission, it unlocks certain abilities for the character and eventually for the main character, Shepard, that can be used in replays, right? All well and good. But when you look at the particulars of Jacob Taylor's backstory, I don't know. It's hard to tell this without spelling it out. It is downright racist, with a big dollop of sexism thrown in for good measure. First of all, we start with the fact that Jacob's father, Ronald Taylor, abandoned him years before. According to Jacob, 3 years before his father went missing and presumed dead, he basically left him. We don't hear anything about other family members, Jacob's mother, or other relatives or anything like that. Only about his father. His father left, and then he went up to space to do his thing, and his ship disappeared, and he is presumed dead. So the first thing we have is the myth of the African-American man, because Jacob Taylor and Ronald Taylor are African-American characters. The African-American male who simply cannot function as a father. A myth that has been perpetuated even by President Obama himself, talking about his relationship with his father, even though recent surveys have shown that is anything but true. In fact, African-American men are far more involved in their lives of their children than their white and even Latino counterparts. And I mention Latinos because I'm Puerto Rican, so in an American context, I would fall into that group. And yet here we have the story of Jacob's father just leaving him behind without nary an explanation. Right? He just apparently couldn't cope with being a dad for some reason. He's not the only character who has a similar story, as a story of parental abandonment, separation, or even parental betrayal. We have Miranda Lawson, who literally was created by her father to be a symbol of his dynasty and legacy. We have Samara, who has to leave two of her daughters behind in a monastery and hunt the third daughter because she has a genetic trait from Samara that allows her to basically feed psychically from other people and kill them in the process. We have Thane, the assassin, who is dying, and his loyalty mission is basically stop his son from following his own footsteps, right? And he tells us that basically he left his family little by little, that he cared about them, but that the job, being an assassin, took over up to the point that the people that he killed, or people related to people that he killed, went back and killed his wife in retaliation. And then, of course, he went off to basically clean house. We even have a minor character in the form of Captain Bailey, a CSEC officer, who says essentially he messed up raising his son. Part of the reason being that he and his family went separate ways because he was a member of the Systems Alliance, and being deployed all around Systems Alliance space, human space, created a vacuum between himself and his children and his family. All characters are given reasons for why they do what they do, except for Jacob's father. Ronald Taylor simply just takes off. He just leaves. That's it. While he was there, he's supposed to be a good dad, but after a while, he just disappears. And clearly, Ronald Taylor was a failure as a father, and Jacob resents him for that. But still, he wants to investigate what happened to him. Now, again, you can dismiss this. You say, well, again, you have a lot of stories in-game about parental abandonment and betrayal. That Jacob is yet another character who has this is not much of a problem. Except, of course, you have this myth of the African-American male who can't cope at the role being a father. In the absence of a given explanation, the cultural background, the cultural noise fills the void. And we get a very ugly stereotype, but one that can be countered, if you will, by the argument that other characters suffered from similar situations. If that was the only problem this story had, it could easily be dismissed. But wait, there's more. Because you get down to the planet, you find the crash site of the Hugo Gernsback, and you learn very quickly that and this is the tropical region of the planet, there is a substance in the food created from the flora, that is the plant life of the planet, that when ingested by humans, essentially breaks down their higher mental functions. They suffer from long-term memory loss. They cannot process things like math or even reading and writing. It seems to affect humans in a severe way. It doesn't make them completely useless, but it certainly affects them significantly. There's what's so-called mental decay. We also learned that Ronald Taylor became the acting captain on the death of the actual captain of the ship that died in the crash. And then we learned that there seems to be some kind of conflict between Jacob Taylor and the so-called hunters. You walk down the beach into a camp and you discover that the camp is made entirely of women. There are no men around. The only women you meet so far are all docile and befuddled and scared, but none of them are aggressive. But all the men you meet throughout this mission, outside of Ronald Taylor, are aggressive, almost animalistic. So you have the stereotype of tropical regions engendering this sort of madness, especially on the Western male mind. You have the idea that men are, when, broken down to their essentials, are always aggressive, and women are always passive, particularly when under the influence of a foreign substance, say like a drug, which is kind of a callback to the war on drugs, particularly in the 1920s, but even today, the idea that, for example, when exposed to certain substances, minorities such as East Asians, African Americans, and Mexican immigrants act in according to their tropical nature, because one of the things about the tropics is also that people are supposed to be oversexed, inferior, and just extremely aggressive. So when exposed to these substances, men from these subset peoples, these minorities, also become oversexed. And when white women are exposed to these substances, or so the stereotype goes, their inhibitions either are lower to the point of being completely gone, or become defenseless in the face of the sexual aggression of a member of this minority, specifically African Americans. So now you have basically three broad stereotypes. You have sort of the stereotypes that have been promoted by movies like Apocalypse Now and books like Into the Heart of Darkness and Lord of the Flies, etc., etc. Tropical regions are regions of savagery and madness. The people that live there or land there are therefore broken down and become animals very quickly. And on top of that, you have a substance that brings aggressiveness in men and docility on women. Then here's the clincher. We found out exactly what happened. Jacob Taylor reads a data pad that says, hey, when the ship crashed, his father, Ronald Taylor, decided to separate the food rations and give them only to the command crew, the non-toxic food, and have everyone else eat the toxic food. And then separate the women, who quickly became docile, among the command crew. But that wasn't enough. He then essentially turned his guns, he owned the armed mechs that was security aboard the ship, against the command crew, basically killing all of them, and then exiling all of the men. And for 10 years, he had all these women at his beck and call, with a small cadre of very aggressive men protecting him on top of the mechs. And then the other men were the ones that became, quote-unquote, the hunters, the exiled, who wanted to commit revenge upon Ronald Taylor, and basically lost their minds in the process. You get to the end of the mission, you confront Ronald Taylor, and essentially he has no excuse whatsoever for his behavior other than, well, I had the opportunity, therefore I engage in mass murder, mass rape, serial murder, and serial rape, because I could, because there was nobody watching over me, which introduces yet another stereotype, and that is the stereotype of the African-American male who cannot deal with a position of authority. Simply doesn't have the acumen to be a leader. Now, we've seen other characters who have the acumen of being a leader in different racial backgrounds and in this game. For example, we have Captain/Counselor/Admiral Anderson, who has great character and leadership potential until the very end. But here, again, without any context whatsoever, he takes on the role of Kurtz from Into the Heart of Darkness, which usually is a role reserved for white men who are left stranded in the wilder regions of either Earth and subtropical regions and tropical regions, or in sci-fi analogs such as the depictions of Mars and Venus in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And he basically fills that role being the king among the savages. He doesn't rule over the Aboriginal peoples because there are no Aboriginal peoples. Instead, he treats his own crew as being his own property, specifically the women. So also you have objectification of women. And in fact, even the game goes so far as to treat all the women present here, outside of the main character, if you created a femchep, as objects, as nothing more than exposition fairies. And the only reason why you even talk to any of the women is to sort of get a hint, an idea of what's going on, and to talk into your heartstrings. Say, oh, look how horrible Ronald Taylor really is. Now, again, you can take any of these concepts and separately speaking, like, well, there might be a reason for this and there might be a reason for that. But when you put them all together, they paint a very ugly picture. And why is this important? Why does it matter? Well, first of all, from a game critic point of view, this is very lazy writing, which means it's very bad writing. Essentially, the writer or writers had an opportunity to create an interesting story. Instead, they went with a very cliche, stereotypical story ripped out of these books and movies that I mentioned before, with nary a change or a chance for introspection or analysis or challenging of the tropes, subverting them, or even playing with the tropes. It's something that we've seen before as well in games like Far Cry 3, right? But even in Far Cry 3, they tried to play with the tropes, right? And challenge them a little bit. They don't even try to do that here. We've seen the story 100 times. Mechanically speaking, the level is okay. I would tweak the maps and the enemies, but nothing major. It is entertaining, strictly on a mechanical level. The other problem is that it turns a very interesting character, that is of Jacob Taylor, into a very boring, samey character. It's like, oh yeah, this is just like every other African-American character I've seen before, abandoned by his dad. Then when he confronts his parents, they turn out to be horrible, broken, weak people. What does it say about the game? What does it say about BioWare? Did the creators of this game set out to create a very racist and sexist subplot? No. Like I said, BioWare has been very consistent in trying to bring diversity, mostly in the terms of sex and gender and sexual identity, but also in race as well. But that doesn't mean that they don't screw up once in a while. They could have done better, but they failed. They didn't intend to be racist, but end up being racist, basically because they lacked the self-awareness to challenge the normalized narratives that are included and repeated in this subplot. So you don't need to intend to be racist to end up being racist anyway. You can be ignorant and racist just because. And finally, because BioWare is trying to include diversity, they're going to make mistakes. And this one's a big one. And I'm hoping that if anyone of BioWare or anyone else is listening to this and watches this, they can say, you know what? It was a good faith attempt. It failed. These are the reasons, some of the reasons why it failed. And we can do better. Because doing diversity right means actually better writing. And better writing makes for better games. When you explore old stories in new ways, you find new ways to tell those stories. And new ways usually are more interesting, fascinating than the old ones. We have seen and read the old stories. We have played them before. We want new things, or at least a new take on old stories. So next time around, just don't put a character there just to be there. Instead, you have to be able to challenge the existing narrative. And when you successfully do that, and by the way, don't be afraid of criticism like this one, you get better games. Well, as always, if you like this or any of the videos on my channel, please comment and subscribe, and I'll see you when I see you. Good night.